Okay, I'd like to share some of my thoughts about this week's readings in Tuesdays with Morrie. I'm glad to hear everybody's enjoying the book. It's one of my favorite books. And each time I read it, something different jumps out at me and applies to my life. I think it's that way with most good books. I was really enjoying the posts where you would read something from Tuesdays with Morrie and discuss it, perhaps apply it to your life or counseling, and then also talk about something else that you've read, perhaps in my book or in Warden or something like that, and then connected all of it together. And I think there's a lot of connections that can be made both through lectures and notes and all the different readings and the videos that we watch and things like that. It's all interconnected in some way. But let's look at Tuesdays with Morrie for this week, and starts with the audio visual. And this is where one of Morrie's friends had sent some things in to, I guess it was the Boston Globe. People had read about him in the newspaper. And Ted Koppel from Nightline, an older news show, kind of like 60 Minutes or something like that. He came to interview Morrie, and it was one of my favorite Ted Koppel interviews. And I think it meant a lot to him as well. I'll just share some things that I underlined on page 70, Morrie's side. And they were talking about, well, how are you today? And Ted says, well, you look good, you look fine. And Morrie says, well, that's what everybody tells me. Is like, well, how do you know you're declining? And Morrie says, well, nobody really will know but me. But he knows. He understands how he feels. And then he begins to talk about eventually Morrie won't be able to talk. One of his good friends, who he went to college with, is losing his hearing. And Ted said, well, I can imagine you two men together one day, one unable to speak, the other unable to hear. What would that be like? And Morrie says, we will hold hands. Morrie said, and there'll be a lot of love passing between us, Ted. We've had over 35 years of friendship. You don't need speech or hearing to feel that. I always know when I'm developing a friendship with somebody, there's always that time where I end up going on a long trip with them, hours in a car together. And I know I've got a good friend when we don't have to force ourselves to say anything. We can just sit there and experience each other's presence and company, and that's okay. That's enough. Sometimes talk is a great thing in a friendship, and sometimes it's okay just to be with one another. And here Morrie's talking about holding hands with a friend of his, another male, and even that, sometimes people in our society might be critical of something like that. But it's a normal thing in other countries for people to hold hands. It's a sign of friendship. Suddenly, with the camera still humming, Morrie adjusted the glasses. He stopped, bit his lip, began to choke up. Tears fell down his nose. I lost my mother when I was a child, and it was quite a blow to me. I wish I'd had a group like yours where I would have been able to talk about my sorrows, a grief and loss group. I would have joined your group because, and his voice cracked, because I was so lonely. Morrie, couple said, that was 70 years ago your mother died. The pain still goes on? You bet, Morrie whispered. So, people enter our lives and leave our lives at different points. But that connection never really ceases. It says he felt so alone during that loss, and that's one of the great things about joining a grief and loss group, counseling group. The first thing people tell me is that they feel so alone in that loss, that nobody is experiencing what they're experiencing. But in that group, from the very first session, they experience universality. They are not alone. And even though they are grieving, having those feelings, they can grieve together and share their experiences. Not only their experience of grief and loss, their experiences of life and of their loved ones as well. Let's see, the next chapter is called The Professor, and on page 75, on the bottom, but a saving embrace came into Morrie's life the following year, his new stepmother, Ava. She was a short Romanian immigrant with plain features, curly brown hair, and the energy of two women. She had a glow that warmed the otherwise murky atmosphere his father created. She talked when her new husband was silent. She sang songs to the children at night. Morrie took comfort in her soothing voice, her school lessons, her strong character. And I wrote that people create our own light or our own darkness. Often our outlook, our experiences, is the result of our own creation. Happiness, sadness, misery, so much comes from our own doing, from our own outlook, from our own interaction with one another. And we also have the power to change that and make it more positive. There's a little quote on 78 in italics: a teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops. From Henry Adams. Then on page 80, the fourth Tuesday, we talk about death. Let's begin with this idea, Morrie said. Everyone knows they're going to die, but nobody believes it. Or if we do believe it, perhaps we don't face it. We repress or suppress that thought because it creates so much anxiety in people. It's the elephant in the room. Our own mortality of loved ones. So, he writes on the next page, everybody knows they're going to die. Nobody believes it. If we did, we would do things differently. Do what the Buddhists do. Every day, have a little bird on your shoulder that asks, is today the day? Am I ready? Am I doing all I need to do? Am I being the person I want to be? On the next page, he writes, the truth is, Mitch, he said, once you learn how to die, you learn how to live. And I just wonder, what does he mean by learning how to die? Learning how to live? Are they interchangeable? How do they affect each other, these two concepts of learning how to die equals learning how to live. Learning how to live equals learning how to die. They are so interconnected. On page 83, I wrote down, I underlined, well, the truth is, if you really listen to that bird on your shoulder, if you accept that you can die at any time, then you might not be as ambitious as you are. So, That's a strange thing, a concept in America. Many Americans would think, oh, we would be more ambitious. We would want to do more of whatever it is in that final day, that final month, that final year, whatever it is. But rather than being ambitious, kind of the American sense, a sense of ambition that is connected with pride or ego. For instance, becoming a millionaire or being successful in business or whatever that might be, owning more material goods. It would be a different kind of ambition. So here Morrie is linking ambition to pride and ego, or contrasting it with true self-transcendence. So Americans don't think about ambition and self-transcendence being the same thing. They're opposite things. Self-transcendence is the loss of ego, the letting go of ego, the focus on the present, the self, and who you're with, and that experience of one another right now being what's important. So the ultimate ambition would not be everything we think ambition is in American society. It's really about being the best person I can be right now, and not for self-gain or ego, but for you, for other. How can I be the best person I can be for you? Then on page 86 he writes, "There's a sadness and suffering on both parts. Grieving has been good for me. I hope it's been good for you also." You might want to change that last line, Rob said. Morrie thought for a second, then said, "You're right. How about, I hope you can find the healing power in grieving." Is that better? Rob nodded. "Add, thank you, Morrie," Morrie said. It's a very high. And then another letter was read from a woman named Jane, who was thanking him for his inspiration on the Nightline program. She referred to him as a prophet. "It's a very high compliment," said a colleague, "a prophet." Morrie made a face. He obviously didn't agree with the assessment. "Let's thank her for her high praise and tell her I'm glad my words meant something to her. And don't forget to sign, thank you, Morrie." So how is grieving good? Most people think, oh, grief is a bad thing. But in reality, the process of grieving allows us to re-examine this other individual's life in relation to our life, and it becomes a transformative process. So grieving promotes growth, realization, awareness. Grieving tends to be a good thing. What would we do if we couldn't grieve? The fifth Tuesday, we talk about family. Page 91. As our great poet Auden said, "Love each other or perish." Page 92. Say I was divorced or living alone or had no children. This disease, what I'm going through, would be much harder. This is part of what a family is about. Not just love, but letting others know there's someone who is watching out for them. It's what I missed so much when my mother died. What I call your spiritual security, knowing that your family will be there watching out for you. Nothing else will give you that. Not money, not fame, not work. the 6th Tuesday we talk about emotions. On page 102, I have circled a sense of purpose. She continued, yes, that's good, you know. So, meaning results in purpose. What I'm doing now, he continued, his eyes still closed, is detaching myself from the experience. Detaching myself. This is important not just for someone like me who is dying, but for someone like you who's perfectly healthy. Learn to detach. He opened his eyes, he exhaled. You know what the Buddhists say, don't cling to things because everything is impermanent. But detachment doesn't mean you don't let the experience penetrate you. On the contrary, you let it penetrate you fully. That's how you know you are able to leave it. So, when different people, psychologists, religious people, whoever it might be, talk about this concept of detachment, it's not that people detach themselves from emotion. It's not that they detach them from other people, themselves from other people. It's that they experience the emotion so fully that they're able to let it go. If you hold back on the emotions, if you don't allow yourself to go all the way through them, you can never get to being detached. You're too busy being afraid of the pain, afraid of the grief, afraid of the vulnerability that loving entails. Fear of emotional pain is one of the greatest things that separates us from one another. Fear of death. I don't have to let it control me. I see it for what it is. Fear. Sometimes just acknowledging fear is enough. I don't want to leave this world in a state of fright. I want to know it's happening, accept it, go to a peaceful place, and let it go. And that's my thoughts on Tuesdays with Morrie this week.